Look, all I'm saying is I'd make a better jester and you a better noble.
Oh please, we all know I have no class.
But your music lineup is full of jazz. That's screaming class.
Since when was jazz ever associated with nobility?
Ladies, you're both clowns. Anyway, some material came in recently. Is it just you two here?
I thought there'd be a lot more people coming to this LARP session. Did I get the address wrong, or...?
Wait, is this for a LARP session? I hate roleplay, though!
You know what? Never mind. I can cover it myself. You guys have fun with your little...
Ooh, wait! We're interested!
I don't know. I got some important things to do.
I said, we're interested, Luckster.
I mean, it is just a video of some dude covering Josh Scorcher and the Green Scorpion. If Luckster isn't interested, that's fine.
Oh wait, this is on Countdown Makers! Well, now I'm interested! Now, I trust you all got the context of what we're covering from the intro skit. This Nintendo Switch Gamer Dude guy did a commentary on Josh and Scorpion's Nintendo fails list, and we're covering both degrees. But before we begin, there's a couple things I want to address. During this video's production, I did a commentary on another one of Josh's countdowns, where he admitted that his fails lists could have been better. Not only that, but our other target, Nintendo Switch Gamer Dude, admitted that he doesn't look back too fondly on the video we're covering.
We can all agree my commentary on Josh Scorcher has the worst feedback because I came off a fanboy and blind to nostalgia and popularity.
However, we're still going to go through with this try-op, because while both targets have some regrets with their videos, other people can still learn from the mistakes that were made. And in regards to Mr. Switch here, if you compare this commentary to his second one on Josh Scorcher, or even his one on Zenny...
Wait, he commentated on me?
Not the point! You'll see that they share some similar problems. So while the critiques may not be relevant towards Josh's content, we still feel that it's relevant towards gamer dudes. So with that out of the way, let's get started.
Okay, before I begin this, I would like to clarify that this list was not I was expecting. While he is right about the history, he doesn't focus on his opinion very well. Basically, it's going to be mostly opinionated. Facts will come when it's needed. Let's begin.
Okay... Odd starting with your first point as the intro statements.
So you say the guy you're covering doesn't share his own thoughts all that often, but his video is heavily opinionated? Or are you saying you'll be the one to bring more onions to the potluck?
I think he's trying to say that he'll only be focusing on the parts of Josh's list that are opinionated, but if that's the case, the wording is so poor it could imply any of these things.
Not helped by how this is literally the first things we hear right out of the gate before we even get to who is being covered. Why?
Because giving context at the start of the video is for communists, I guess. I don't know.
In the 80s, the home video game industry in North America died due to a glut of terrible software produced by unauthorized publishers/developers, flooding the market and effectively turning many customers and retailers off of gaming. Anyone could make a game, no questions asked, and sell it to anyone. How could Nintendo succeed in a dead industry, let alone revitalize it and restore people's trust in it? Well, Nintendo's brilliant idea was this.
Don't let that little sticker fool you. We owe everything to it. Nintendo established a third-party licensing program that restricted how many games a publisher could release in a year. This meant that developers had to put their best foot forward, or not at all. It went as far as NES cartridges having to be made through...
This is getting a bit long. How long does this go on for?
Well, Gamer Dude here plays out the whole number 10 segment, so I imagine it goes on for quite a while.
Jesus fucking Christ, why?
Oh, and he does this for every other entry of the list he covers too. He doesn't even bother to fast forward it or cut out the parts that aren't needed. Didn't you just get done saying that the history was mostly correct and you were going to focus on their opinions? Why are you playing the parts that are talking about the history then?
And boy, howdy, did we get a smorgasbord of crap games for the NES. Yeah, game development was still new, but it seems so many people were able to coast on the popularity of the NES and other licensed properties. And let's count our blessings. We never had anything like Custer's Revenge, so Nintendo's strategy worked, just not as well as everyone hoped.
Unfortunately, the sticker eventually came into controversy. The term seal of quality implies that the game is good, and Nintendo came under some heat from salty nerds claiming false advertisement. This is why you rented before you bought in the 90s, kids.
How dareth these heathen whine of false advertising when these games are not of quality?
Like, seriously, is it a bad thing that people complain about the NES's shovelware problem, or are they just entitled nerds for not liking the self-admitted smorgasbord of crap? Maybe there were people who used the seal of quality to trash games that weren't nearly as bad as the shovelware, but the fact that Scorpion called the fans entitled right after Josh complained about the shovelware problem paints a whole different image that makes it look like you two are on Bethesda's marketing team.
It just works.
Anyway, Nintendo quietly changed the seal to read Official Nintendo Licensed Product. So did that fix things? Nope.
Hold on, the sticker isn't there to stop shovelware. It's to say that it's licensed by Nintendo. They only changed the wording on the sticker, by your own admission, purely because of the controversy that Nintendo's seal of quality caused in the past. So no, Josh and Oscar, the change of the sticker may not have fixed the shovelware problem, but it did deflect the controversy that the original sticker had.
I've got better things to do.
The worst part is that it's still going on today. Seriously, the Nintendo eShop is filled with terrible ports of mobile games. But as much as we complain about this, to Nintendo's credit, they were able to re-establish some sort of standard. And again, this policy literally saved the industry. But there are days when we wish they were just a wee bit stricter.
If you put too much restriction on someone, you have become a communist.
Oh no.
I was joking!
If Nintendo putted too much restrictions on a third-party company, then a game can't compete on another game on the same console.
Oh boy, this gives me war flashbacks. Neither Josh nor Oscar said they wanted Nintendo to be that strict with publishing. They wanted Nintendo to focus more on publishing better quality games as opposed to all this shovelware. A wee bit doesn't suddenly mean communism.
It's like saying Nintendo shouldn't let Sega software strive. And I like the Sonic games the most. Even the games that focus on something new and not classic ones.
First off, the problem you're mentioning isn't quality control, it's competition. The reason why Sega games weren't on Nintendo consoles back then wasn't because of a lack of quality control, it was because Sega was desperately competing against Nintendo. So what you're saying here is completely irrelevant to Scorpion's point. Especially since the reason why Sonic games are on Nintendo consoles now is because Sega went third party.
Unless you're trying to say that Sonic games are so glitchy and poorly designed that they would never pass a strict quality control test, well, that wouldn't be Nintendo's fault at that point. It would be Sega and Sonic Team's fault for not creating a quality product.
Aren't Sonic games typically multi-platform anyway? Like, sure, Colors and the Boom games were exclusively on Nintendo platforms, but every other main game was either eventually ported over anyway or came out on several other systems, so it's not like you'd be Sonicless in a world where Nintendo struck Sega with a high standards hammer.
Oh please, that implies the Sonic franchise has standards.
Only one game used this!
Hyped, then vanished. Good, could easily abuse microtransactions.
Only one game used this!
Fire, fire, fire!
Overhyped Nintendo Zapper made immortal by Smash Brothers.
Fire, fire, fire!
Cute but unnecessary gimmick made immortal by Smash Brothers.
It's so bad. Well, at least the marketing's honest.
It's Digimon Tamers, except you never have a full Digimon.
You just spent $90 on a weight scale. Congrats.
And you thought the Genesis attachments were bad.
Pay us money for plastic!
Pay us money for cardboard!
So glad Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles is getting a remake.
Used by a lot of games. No one used it.
Only one game used this.
Selfie generation a decade before it happened, with bad filters.
You only own this because you bought Link's crossbow training.
At least it made Pokemon fans happy for a bit.
You want to play DK64 and Majora's Mask?
Useful at first, died off later.
Incredibly niche. Though, personally, I love this damn thing.
You would.
So, quick question, but what's with these ratings? Why is the GameCube mic rated higher than the headset, despite Scorpion saying the same thing about both of them? Why is the Wii Fit board rated a 7 out of 10, despite Scorpion claiming it to be an overglorified weight scale?
What's weirder is that rarely any of these peripherals get a good explanation for why they're embarrassing. Or heck, how them being embarrassing is considered a collective fail. I think it would have been better to put these items in categories so you could elaborate on what made a bunch of these peripherals so bad. Like how a bunch of these could be summed up as unnecessary, gimmicky, were only used on a few games, or even unresponsive. Yet we're still not told why they're the way they are.
I suppose one might raise a finger to this interjection, ready to call us out on taking such an obvious joke seriously. However, jokes can have points behind them, with this entire bit being an example of this, as they're using this to talk about all of the add-ons at once instead of really explaining anything. But that also becomes an issue, seeing as oftentimes we can't exactly see where they're coming from with these. The GameCube microphone being one of the obnoxious examples, as they make a joke about fire, similarly to how they did with the laser scope, but whereas there we have an understanding of it being, you know, a scope for a gun, the microphone joke doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to an outsider like myself who didn't have one. Like, did it have a habit of catching fire? Was it used for games similarly to the other peripheral? Like, I don't get it. Also, screw you, Oscar. I got the Wii Zapper for Ghost Recon, not Link's crossbow training.
So being creative with the way you play is number 9? I guess that means other consoles shouldn't be following in Nintendo's footsteps.
No one said it was bad to be creative. Despite how contradictory the ratings may be, they show that they were good or at least enjoyable to use based on these ratings. 5 out of 10 isn't great, but it's not something to scoff at. In fact, a bunch of these peripherals had the reason of only one game used this, implying they wanted more use out of these peripherals, implying they liked them enough to play with them more.
Alternatively, it could mean that the peripherals were useless because only one game used them, and that's it. But regardless, the problem isn't that the innovative ways of playing were the problem, it's the fact that they weren't good in hindsight.
Despite the fact VR games do something different with the gaming genre and not everyone wants to play with just button inputs.
Yes, the gaming genre of video games.
The Wii and Wii U are guilty of a lot of ways to play. And the Wii had the best time in its lifespan.
Because all interactive entertainment is in virtual reality nowadays. Yo-yo or YOLO, scrub.
I want to be a yo-yo man, he cried. Make me a yo-yo man.
Also, this ties back into the previous point about how you're strawmanning what Josh and Scorpion said. Being different wasn't their problem, being underutilized was. Though if I can focus on your examples for a bit, are we going to ignore that the Wii U was a commercial failure? Even then, the Wii wasn't just successful because of its peripherals, it was successful because of the low price and casual games made it accessible to a lot of people. Sure, the peripherals might have helped, but you show no source proving that, and even then it wouldn't be the sole reason for its success.
However, I think the other accessories outside of those 2 previous consoles are a good example of bad accessories if that was the norm.
That was literally the basis of their point, though. What do you mean? Josh and Oscar's entire point is contingent on the fact that the peripherals Nintendo released throughout their entire lifespan for the consoles weren't good. Even if you want to dismiss the Wii and Wii U peripherals, that still leaves 6 entire generations of consoles spanning from 23 years of gaming, each having a small collection of flawed toys that went with them.
So in other words, I'm going to shoot my entire point in the foot by admitting that most of the peripherals were actually not good.
That was me you shot, you idiot!
Oh, suck it up.
I've got better things to do.
Nintendo's relationship with third parties has been unbelievably rocky since day one. From smothering them with overly strict guidelines until they leave, then being unable to be taken seriously as a platform, to finally not being able to get enough of Nintendo, this whole situation might as well be a weird roundabout allegory about a controlling father who alienated his kids, then embarrassed himself in trying to get them back, but eventually ending on a happy note.
You know, I kinda wanna see that now.
This is very confusing. Nintendo needs to make sure that there's a balance of their strict nature. I'm pretty sure that if you aren't strict enough, you will become a doormat. A company is like an enormous clock. If you don't focus on asserting yourself more, you're a broken one.
But if you're too strict, you're a communist.
Also, they brought up how Nintendo literally told Square to never come back after they dared develop a game for a different console.
So they told Nintendo that they were going to develop Final Fantasy VII for Sony, and Nintendo's response was a very politically correct,
Now get out of here and never come back!
Considering how you previously stated how you'd hate the idea of Nintendo excluding Sega due to overly strict guidelines, I think you'd come to agree with them on how maybe Nintendo was a little too strict back then.
So, what happens when you ask Nintendo to bring back some of their more neglected franchises?
Come on, Reggie, give us Mother 3!
How about this instead?
I know that skit is pure hyperbole, but does Nintendo hate their niche franchises or something? Because if so, I have a few questions for Sakurai.
Yeah, it's almost like Nintendo wants us to forget about some of their old franchises to a seemingly hostile extent. You want a new Rhythm Heaven? How about Golden Sun? Advance Wars? Chibi Robo? Custom Robo? Well, guess what? It ain't happening, despite a vast amount of gamers hammering at Nintendo to get on that cash cow.
You do realize that just because fans want a new game, that doesn't mean the developers want to make a new one, right? With the Mother series, for example, the lead developer, Shikasatu Itoi, doesn't want to make a new game for the series. He even compared the situation to how pop stars tend to lose their appeal after the third album. I get that the fans have a strong attachment to these series, but if the original developers are running on fumes, then it's not really fair to force them to make something they don't want to. Now sure, they could always give the franchise to a different developer, but that doesn't always work out for the best, since differences in their design philosophies could cause a divide in the fanbase. With the Crash Bandicoot and Spyro franchises, for example, they were considered dead by the fans for quite some time due to the declining quality after the original developers left. Sure, the remasters came out and were widely praised, but the fact it took so long to get there shows that there's still a risk in switching developers.
Also, keep what Josh says here in mind for just a little longer. It will come back later.
Seriously, Nintendo, you have a base of rabid fans that are begging to give you their money. Why don't you want our money?
Shut up and take my money.
I'm pretty sure this meme conjured itself into existence for you. Why don't you take the hint?
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
Josh, dear, these are niche franchises for a reason. Sure, they'll make a little cash for Nintendo, but you're acting like this could fund the solution to world hunger.
When Nintendo does release a game in these franchises, they often do so in a way that it feels like it belongs on the malicious compliance subreddit. Paper Mario Color Splash was a commercial failure, Metroid Federation Force was met with groans and facepalms, and how many Star Fox remakes do we really need? Seriously, all you have to do is use the same gameplay formula from 64, give it a few new improvements and features, and slap it onto a new narrative. That is practically what you do with all of your other franchises, and it works!
Oh, hi, Oscar. Just a question. How did you blow a hole in your foot this willingly?
You're pretty much asking for another remake after saying you don't want a remake.
Even the joke box art here works against Scorpion's point. Star Fox 65, Atros is somehow still alive. Wow, that almost sounds like a soulless remake that was only greenlit to get some money. But on a more serious note, sticking closely to the original formula isn't a catch-all solution, as that can lead to people disliking the game due to how it doesn't do much different from the previous games. It's funny that you mentioned Star Fox Zero here, since that was actually a complaint some people had with it. More specifically, Arlo's review, where he stated that he was disappointed in how the game played it too safe.
This is the most startlingly unambitious Nintendo game I've ever played. There are so many other things they could have done to further the series, and they made no effort whatsoever.
So saying that they should just stick to the original formula and add a few bells and whistles isn't a good enough solution, since that wouldn't automatically make a game good for people.
Scorcher, you ain't free from Oscar's point either, bud. With him mentioning how much games and niche franchises get lambasted by fans of the series they're making games for, do you honestly think a game company would want to take the money of fans who, even when something new comes out, give blowback for experimenting? But as Oscar's show, are tired of seeing the same basic shit come out of the same franchises that do their thing right? Like, stuff like Pokemon, Mario, and Zelda have a wide appeal and have a reason as to why they spend so much time making new games for them. They make money, and even then they're constantly experimenting in their own right to varying degrees of success with fan reception. Hashtag bring back the National Dex, anyone? But smaller games with a less widespread appeal don't make nearly as much money with that many unhappy fans.
Sure, there are times where a niche IP gets more games and can get more fans and bank, but that's a risk Nintendo doesn't want to take half the time, because these franchises don't have the longevity and appeal of their more successful ones. And changing things up in a way that doesn't cause an outrage takes an even bigger risk on a series that hasn't shown a lot of promise. Don't get us wrong, a bunch of these games are great in their own right, but reworking a game's formula to be new and work well is like defusing a bomb, and copy-pasting what worked before will only go so far.
The reason we give Nintendo crap for this is that they themselves have proven that reviving a dying franchise can lead to some serious success. Donkey Kong Country Returns brought the Big 8 back into the spotlight, and then there's Fire Emblem Awakening, which literally rekindled the Fire Emblem franchise into a global phenomenon. And don't even get me started on the mimetic zeitgeist known as Kid Icarus Uprising. I'm willing to bet that if they announce a new game in the Mother or F-Zero franchise, the fanbase will have no shortage of minds blown.
Probably followed by a resounding meh afterwards.
Like, don't get us wrong, you could be correct in saying that Nintendo reviving the more niche games could be met with resounding success. Hypothetically speaking, it very much could. But the point is not only that it's risky business to do so and is ultimately a gamble that Nintendo might not walk away with bank from, but also that it's a lot more complicated to bring back a niche franchise than you might think, because they can never be too certain that fans wouldn't just do what they did with Paper Mario and turn on every game after Sticker Star.
Thankfully, with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate celebrating the history of gaming, and the Nintendo Switch proving to be a revitalizing platform for some long-forgotten games, perhaps this issue will be addressed soon enough. Here's hoping Metroid Prime 4 is good.
So you're asking more quantity over quality. That's basically the problem.
That's literally the exact opposite. How do you even... What?
Scorcher and Scorpion are asking for niche franchises to get more games, yes, but with the examples of Star Fox Zero, Federation Force, and Color Splash, we see that they wanted games that fans could enjoy, so they aren't asking for just any old rushed out things either. You know, That combined with the earlier complaints of shovelware. They're literally not asking for quantity over quality, but instead a mix of the two. And yes, it is contradictory considering how Mr. Scorpion followed up to that point, but we've already addressed that.
Sega has made the same mistake twice. To quote Shigeru Miyamoto, a delayed product is a good product, but a rushed product is bad forever. I am aware of updates, but the only problem is your first impression will probably be sour.
Ugh, I hate this use of Miyamoto's quote from the 90s. Sure guys, let's ignore how he said this during a time where the case was that a rush game that wound up being bad would forever be bad, but has now been outdated with the likes of downloadable content, patches, and overall other updates to said games that could have been rushed. Hello, No Man's Sky, how are you this fine day? We can also choose to ignore how Miyamoto's quote doesn't even considering the staggering list of games that were in development hell, even at the time they eventually came out to still be bad. Duke Nukem Forever's mere existence will always invalidate this quote just on its own. Like, can we please stop using this quote? Like, forever? It's the current year, people. Get with the times. You do also mention that you're looking primarily at first impressions, but that still doesn't change how your quote is hilariously outdated, as Miyamoto himself wasn't looking for first impressions either, but merely how the game was handled and how it plays as it's released. Hence the, "a rushed game is forever bad" part of the quote.
But that implies this Miyamoto quote had anything to do with Josh's and Scorpion's point. May I remind you, these two were complaining about how Nintendo's niche franchises aren't getting new installments. Giving them the "a delayed game is always good" lecture is pointless since there is no game to delay. They're not asking for a game to come out faster, they're asking for a game to be in production, period.
Even then, that's only one person's word against another's. Without proof to back up Miyamoto's quote, it's pointless to use in a context that doesn't fit it to begin with. And considering the Bible passage Doodle dropped on us, that should say how outdated the quote really is.
I know you put some games that are old on there, but given that these games would have been better with updating shows that you kind of don't know limitations.
What do you mean they're not taking limitations into account? The only games they bashed in this segment were Color Splash, Federation Force, and Star Fox Zero, all of which were possible to update at the time. The old games they showed footage of were examples of abandoned IPs they wanted Nintendo to revive. They don't need to take limitations into account because they weren't criticizing the games that had those limitations.
Guess what, Scorpio B? Did you hear about these computer mobs? They can operate in color, and they can branch out to folks all around the world conveniently and without issue.
Without issue. Without issue. Without...
With no issue. God, I want your internet.
Even though time waits for no one, Nintendo's got a tendency to fall behind when it comes to online services. Right off the bat, online netcoding with Nintendo is a nightmare! The only games with decent online gameplay are Mario Kart and Pokemon. Sorta!
Yeah, I actually hate the fact that you have to buy a separate piece of hardware just to play Smash Ultimate properly online. And even then, the sheer amount of frame delays makes Marvel vs. Capcom 3's online look good.
And then there's Splatoon. Not only is there no TeamSpeak making communicating with your squad impossible, but it also had a punishment system set up for players who left matches early. Not a bad idea in theory, but the online netcode was so bad that disconnections were common, and anyone who had an accidental disconnect got hit with the ban button almost instantly.
And what's that? You want to play with your friends? No problem. All you need to do is enter your inconveniently long friend code and send them to your buddies elsewhere. I mean, it's not like other platforms like Steam have a friend request button that saves you all that trouble. Oh, wait!
I've got better things to do.
Online is barely a concern. Here's an idea. Get a better Wi-Fi router. If you don't want to use an Ethernet adapter, that's fine. But don't blame Nintendo for terrible Wi-Fi.
Sweet Lord and Krispy Kreme, are you telling these two to get better Wi-Fi routers when it's Nintendo that has trouble with these connections? It wouldn't be considered a Nintendo fail if it wasn't Nintendo's fault, and you do jack all to prove it isn't.
Wonderful fix, my dude. Maybe next time you can get a better voice box for that text-to-speech.
Also, this assumes Josh and Scorpion don't have good Wi-Fi adapters.
After all, they claim that there's no issues with the internet.
I will
The recessive gameplay for the Wii was terrible, I'll give you that. But that's it.
So that's it, then, huh? Are we going to ignore the various footage of Mario Maker 2, Splatoon 2, and Smash Ultimate lagging? Are we going to ignore the article they put on screen, which showed that Splatoon players got banned for disconnecting too many times? Are we going to ignore their complaints that weren't about the connection? Like the one where Nintendo relies on dated systems like friend codes when other online networks have more convenient options?
Maybe he needs to get better eyes and ears.
If you're going to say that Nintendo's online systems are fine, then you're going to need to disprove the evidence that Josh and Scorpion have that says otherwise, because as is, there's more reason to believe them than you.
Worst part about all of this is that other game publishers have adapted to the times when it comes to fan creations. Namco commissioned a fan artist to promote Tales of Berseria, Capcom promoted a Mega Man fan game, and Sega brought on fan developers to create Sonic Mania, which quickly became one of Sonic's most beloved games.
Meanwhile, Nintendo actively refuses to adapt to the times. It's a real shame because when they do try a modern trend, they do create some good things. All the great and mostly free DLC and updates for Hyrule Warriors. Heck, Splatoon is technically Nintendo's online shooter. They can succeed, so it makes it a little more annoying when they blunder.
I'm sorry, what's the connection here? Oh hey, Nintendo makes great updates on new games, so obviously that applies to adapting new copyright policies, because it's not like game development is completely different from brand management or anything. Like, don't get me wrong, I agree that those policies are pretty archaic, but I don't see the connection between these two statements other than new things. Especially when you admitted in your last entry that they can botch up some of the new things they try as well, like their online policies, or new franchise installments.
On the flip side though, Cadence of Hyrule is a small step in the right direction regarding fan support, not to mention Sans and Cuphead appearing in Smash Bros. Hopefully that's a sign of better things to come, but I'm not holding my breath.
Yes, I still exist in this video, by the way. How does Sans and Cuphead being implemented into Smash correlate to Nintendo throwing cease and desists at fan content? Like, I suppose to an extent Undertale is like an inspired game off of Earthbound if you want to stretch a bit, but Cuphead?
Side note, Cuphead isn't exactly a fan game. It's an official indie game with a run-and-gun style of gameplay that was inspired by the likes of Contra, which is owned by Capcom, not Nintendo. You could call these fan games, but they aren't taking names from Nintendo IPs for anything outside of inspiration. If Undertale and Cuphead used a bunch of Nintendo characters in these games, they would be a lot more likely to get a cease and desist, not because they're fan games, but because they're using characters and IPs that don't belong to those developers.
I only half agree with this statement. If Nintendo don't protect their copyrighted work, they risk things going out of control. It's the fan gamer developers' fault for not asking for permission for the content.
To an extent, I get where you're coming from, and it's not wrong. Nintendo does have the right to shut down these fan game devs for using their intellectual properties without permission. However, we have those pesky examples of other companies looking at fan creators and supporting them wholeheartedly. For instance, that Street Fighter X Mega Man game that Josh and Oscar brought up that was in development as a fan creation that was only later backed by Capcom themselves, even without initial permission given. So it's not like Nintendo has to keep to their more antiquated ideologies of IP protection. In fact, Josh and Oscar would prefer they didn't. It's just that they choose to, which the two see as a failure.
Now don't get us wrong, the PlayStation itself is amazing. After all, it's home to some of our favorite games of all time. The fail here is that Nintendo ended up creating its greatest rival after Sega had shot themselves in the foot multiple times. Although, when you really think about it, this astronomical blunder might have ended up benefiting the gaming industry in the long run.
Nintendo's cutthroat ruthlessness in their early life inadvertently created competition for themselves, causing both these companies to make greater strides to win fans. Not only did Sony thrive from this, but it also gave Microsoft the incentive to enter the industry too. Nintendo was no longer the dominant player in the game, and at the time, that was a good thing.
It truly says a lot when, in the end, Nintendo's greatest failure ended up being one of the most wonderful things to ever happen to the gaming industry. This countdown ended on a good note.
Well, the last bit you brought up was satisfying, but the only problem is that the reason why Nintendo refused this is because of trust issues. Nintendo didn't want to use CDs because they thought it could be hacked. Not to mention disc games would go to Sony and cartridges would go to Nintendo. Cartridges have less storage than CDs, so that meant Sony would have gotten more money on CDs. The funny thing is you brought it up in your other parts of the list.
Okay, that was the detail they didn't bring up. Now my question is, what does this do to their overall point? At the end of the day, Josh and Scorpion considered this Nintendo's biggest fail because they tried to ruthlessly cut down the competition and failed in doing so. Sure, their preference to cartridges was a part of the reason why they went through with it, but that still doesn't change anything.
And with that in mind, you even acknowledge the problem with sticking to cartridges to begin with, being that CDs have more space to utilize, which if anything further exacerbates how this rivalry with Sony could have been considered one of, if not, their biggest failure. Like, not only does this point have nothing to do with Scorcher's point, but had it done anything, it just kind of agrees with the placement of the entry.
Final thoughts. This wasn't the worst list I've seen from you, but the fact you kept shooting yourself in the foot shows you can't keep consistency on your list.
Where?
Well, we know. We spent a lot more time covering the list than we did your response. But how would your video convey the idea Josh and Oscar have been shooting each other in the foot? The most you brought up were things they didn't even imply, like exaggerating how strict they wanted Nintendo to be in number 10, but start saying Nintendo needs to be less strict in number 8, saying they want more quantity over quality in number 5, when they were against that in both 5 and 10, or where you assumed the internet problem in number 3 was a personal problem, despite the examples and articles they brought to the table saying otherwise. The devil is in the details, and thoroughly combing through the fine print is crucial if you want to say these people are saying these things. Actually, not even that. You just said they've been contradicting themselves without even showing how.
So I guess from here we move on to final thoughts, and considering the video we were, well, mostly supposed to cover, I'll keep mine short and concise. Cut to the important context next time, please. Watching this video was a drag, and considering how little you were actually covering it, it just came off as unnecessary. Of course, yes, there were problems with your points, but I figure my co-op partners will cover those. I'll just stick to the biggest production flaw this time.
Now, if I could touch on the actual points you made, you tend to argue in extremes a lot. Oh, Josh and Scorpion think Nintendo should have a bit more quality control? Nah, that would be inherently too strict. Oh, they think Nintendo peripherals should be used more often? Well, they just hate new ways to play. Oh, they want a niche franchise every now and then? Obviously, they want a rushed-out product. And when you weren't strawmanning their arguments, you were either completely missing their point to begin with, or just went, "Nuh-uh, this is actually good," and provided nothing to back up your case, which, as I said before, gives us no reason to believe you over them. As basic as this advice may sound, I can only recommend that you pay closer attention to what your target's saying, and make sure you provide evidence to back up your claims, since from what I've seen, those are two of the biggest problems that plague your commentaries.
I guess I'll cover Josh's countdown. There's been a recurring problem in most of your game company fails videos, including this one, and it's that half the time the reasons why things are ranked the way they are, and even being on the list, either don't hold up or don't seem to exist. For instance, not reviving old IPs shouldn't be considered a fail since there are a bunch of factors in what would make newer installments cash cows outside of a vocal fan base, so not pumping out more games could be a good thing. Or how your entire entry on peripherals mostly glossed through how fun or utilized they were, and not how successful they were. Like, Rod was immortalized in Smash Bros. For helping Nintendo survive the game crash of '83 by selling video games in the toy aisles. It helped the NES sell more, making it part of its success. How is that considered a fail? Often you don't distinguish a poor business decision from public or even personal disapproval, and that's what hinders these lists. If it's something the fans don't like, you tend to focus more on that than how it's bad for the company you're referring to. On top of that, none of these countdowns seem to have a proper criteria, so mix that with the scarce amount of reasons and odd ranking, and you have a cocktail of understandable topics on the surface floating on top of a bunch of confusion.
So, I think that should be it. Oh, hello? Oh, crud, I forgot. See ya!
Well, that was abrupt.
Still no one else here. So, do you, want to be a cleric, or a black knight, or...
Zenny, I swear to God I will send you to the gallows.
Is that a yes?